Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Firstly, I acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet, and pay my respect to their ancestors and their descendants. I'd like to acknowledge the presence this evening of Quentin Bryce AD CVO, Ellen van Neerven, author, Throat, members of the University Senate and University Senior Management Group. I'd like to also acknowledge Professor Tim Dunn, Pro-Vice Chancellor, UQ of the University of Queensland and Chair of the University of Queensland Press Board. I'd like to also acknowledge other UQP board members. I'd like to acknowledge Ben James, Director, the University of Queensland Press, and his UQP colleagues. I'd also like to acknowledge friends and supporters of the University of Queensland and of UQP. I understand we also have UQ colleagues and colleagues from other universities in the audience this evening, and I'd particularly like to acknowledge the presence as well of UQ alumni, distinguished guests, general assembled throng, wherever or whatever you might be doing, putting the kids to bed, cooking dinner, eating dinner, joining us from wherever you are. And finally, but certainly not, certainly with the greatest degree of respect, I'd like to acknowledge any other elders and members of the Indigenous community who may be joining us this evening through the media. So my name is Associate Professor Sandra Phillips. I'm the inaugural Associate Dean of the University of Queensland, Faculty of Humanities and Social Science. My next order of business is to introduce the Honourable Dame Quentin Bryce, AD CVO. Ms. Quentin Bryce has enjoyed a rich and distinguished career as an academic, lawyer, community and human rights advocate, senior public service, a senior public officer, University College principal, and vice-regal representative in Queensland and for Australia. Across her career, Quentin has worked with women, families and young people while extending her influence across broad and diverse spectrums, including the rural, regional, aged, Indigenous, migrant and disability sectors. Quentin remains a pioneer in contemporary Australian society with more than 50 years of experience in reform, community building and leadership. Welcome, Quentin.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Phillips, for your warm welcome and kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I pay my respect to the traditional keepers of this magnificent land, the land of the Turrbal and Yugara people, and I acknowledge wise Indigenous women who've taught me across my life what it means to be an elder, sharing country, language, culture. What a joy it is to be with Munjali Yungabe author Ellen van Neerven to celebrate their second poetry collection, Throat. This beautiful book, exhilarating, deeply moving, from the heart to the heart. Right there on centre page, page 61, you will find a treaty for sharing power between the reader and the author of this book. Beneath it is a space for your signature, but first the poet dares you with some very confronting questions. My friends, this slender volume holds beauty, lyricism, tenderness, haunting music and memories. But at once it is tough, powerful, arresting. It won't let you go until you get to the end. You want to know what's happening next. Truly, it's a page turner. Ellen, may I say, this reader feels a true sense of gratitude to you for a thrilling addition to your growing, highly acclaimed contribution to the literature of our nation. We should express our appreciation too to UQP, University of Queensland Press, whose dedication to fine publishing has held fast for more than 70 years. Across them, constantly mindful of the challenges of maintaining traditions of intellectual rigour, while at the same time being thoroughly modern and contemporary. A reputation for launching new, bold, exciting writers in fiction and non-fiction. And I think of Peter Carey, Kate Grenville, Janet Turner Hospital, so many more. They continue this with notable success. The glittering prizes, bestsellers, shortlists, stunning critical reviews. Perhaps what's not as well known is UQP's position as Australia's leading poetry publisher. I think that this began when much-loved David Malouf persuaded Frank Thompson to publish the paperback poetry series in the 60s, my halcyon days. I look back on them with endearing and enduring nostalgia. Nobody, but nobody, had more fun, shock and awe than arts undergrads in the 60s on this campus. Everybody studied English. We piled into the famous lecture theatres B9 and Room 45, and you could hear a pin drop as we listened to lectures from scholarly wits, sages and would-be novelists. Poetry from every age. We argued passionately with each other in tutorials with clever young postdoc students. It was the beginning of our serious education, important and influential years of transition from girlhood to womanhood, boyhood to manhood, looking out to worlds beyond our own rather comfortable, conservative existences funded by Commonwealth scholarships. As I've been reading through some earlier works and interviews with our poet, I've been reflecting on the huge impact that two treasured women made on me and my generation of poetry lovers in those days. Oodgeroo Noonuccal, first modern-day protest writer, and Judith Wright, environmentalist and land rights campaigner. They were the first to speak the truth to us about justice and human rights for First Nations people. I've turned to them again and again for inspiration. How radical their words, how brave their writing, never holding back. It's vital for us to have their work easily available in bookshops and libraries. I notice an ever-increasing interest in poetry across all ages, particularly among my young friends, my granddaughter and her pals. I knew when I gave Alexandra this book, she wouldn't be able to resist it. And especially as very early up is the most wonderful writing of enormous relevance to her and her pals, Chermy. Vibrant pictures painted of universal themes, from the Jarjums, I love that word, from the Jarjums right through to Nanny. Ellen, the special bond with your grandmother touches my heart, and your love of family sparkles. They are the source, it seems to me, of your strength, your confidence, your courage. And your political voice has a vitality and a rhythm that resonate with the poetic lines of the Uluru Statement from the heart. Its generous invitation to walk together to all Australians for voice, treaty, truth. I want you to know how truly delighted I am to see the joyous response to your new work. It's everywhere, and I hope that you savour every moment of this time.
Thank you.
Please know how much it means to me that you are the first recipient of the UQP award in my name. My gratitude to my alma mater, Sharon, the University of Queensland, and to the distinguished University of Queensland Press for your gesture, an honour that brings together times and places of lasting import in my life, to be forever cherished. And Ellen, it's absolutely thrilling for me to have this opportunity to offer you my warmest congratulations, my thanks, and my best wishes with your beautiful writing. Thank you. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Quentin. That was a beautiful introduction to the evening, and how special it is to have you both here together in real life to celebrate this evening. Ellen's collection, Throat, and also the fact of Ellen being the inaugural winner of the award established in honour of you, Quentin Bryce, as well as in honour of those who will come after you, Ellen, with their wonderful writing published by UQP. So this is the first of many, I would hope, many such evenings. And while it is in unusual circumstances, and we know that 2020 isn't quite done with us, it's only August, who knows what more we might need to weather through this calendar year. But the fact that we can celebrate this tonight is really a significant moment, and I'm very grateful to be here with you both. So, Ellen, you're going to read for us. I will read the introduction before you begin. For those who may not know you, unlikely to be many, Ellen van Neerven is an award-winning writer of Mununjali, Yugambeh and Dutch heritage. They write fiction, poetry, plays and non-fiction. Ellen's first book, Heat and Light, was the recipient of the David Unipen Award, the Dobby Literary Award and the New South Wales Premier's Literary Award Indigenous Writers Prize. Ellen's second book, a collection of poetry, Comfort Food, was shortlisted for the New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards Kenneth Slessor Prize and highly commended for the 2016 Wesley Michael Wright Prize. Throat, Ellen's highly anticipated poetry collection, is the inaugural recipient of the UQP Quentin Bryce Award, and further was today shortlisted for the Judith Wright Calanthe Award at the Queensland Literary Awards. Congratulations, Ellen.
Thank you. I just feel very blessed and honoured to be in the company of these two amazing women, Quentin, Sandra. Thank you for being in conversation with me tonight about my book. It's a huge honour, and I'm really looking forward to talking a little bit more after my reading. Just as I am very honoured to be on this country, so I'd like to do my own acknowledgement of country. Jingari Jimbalangs, which means hello friend in Yugambeh language, which is the language of my grandparents through my maternal side. I would like to acknowledge Yagara and Turrbal Dargan, and also acknowledge the neighbouring communities around the Greater Brisbane area. I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, as well as other First Nations peoples watching tonight and listening to this talk. I come from Mulunjali, which is the Yugambeh word for Bow Desert, the Bow Desert area, which is just south of where we are now. I wanted to acknowledge Maywa, the Brisbane River that's close by, and it's the river that's been a big part of my life growing up in this city. And I would like to acknowledge my ancestors from Black Soil Country and my really big family here in South East Queensland. I couldn't be more proud to be a First Nations person from Southeast Queensland. I think this country is just so beautiful and so amazing, and I'm also really proud to have been able to grow up here and be part of a big family of the Curry and Williams families here in Meanjin, Brisbane, and we grew up on the north side, so I thought the first poem that I'll read tonight is Chermy, which is a very north side poem about the Chermy Shopping Centre, which is the area that my mum and her siblings grew up in, and I was really glad to have yarns with mum about growing up and yarns with my auntie Tina about what it was like growing up in Chermy and compared to what it is now. And I feel like this work is a communal work. It's not just an individual work. It's their voices are in there as well. And my mum's just behind, she's here, which is really cool to have. I think this is my first in-person event, even though there's only probably about 10 of us in the room. It's a different energy. So I'm excited to read this poem and bring some of that energy into the room. Chermy. Westfield Chermy is one of our sacred sites. Gamming, my grandparents came to Chermy in the early 50s. They had a house on Fee Street where my mother and her siblings grew up. They moved there after the two older children were born in Waco. Mum was the second born in Fee Street. The shopping centre first opened in 1957, Chermside Drive-In Shopping Centre. Now it's the largest single-level shopping centre in Australia. It expanded and expanded over years. Mum remembers an oval surrounded by bush, swimming pool in the middle. On the weekends, she and her brothers and sisters had the choice, go to the pool or the cinema. The Dawn opened in 1928, shut in 2005, the last single-screen cinema in Brisbane. Around Chermy, everything's changed, some parts unrecognisable, but the houses near Fee Street, a pocket has stayed the same old little houses. On Fee Street, all the family's kids played together. Their names Arnie will know. The bush was all open. Could walk to the bush through to Geebung and Aspley to see friends, go to school, Geebung Primary. All you had to worry about were snakes, never wore shoes, Geebung Camp among the trees, and Geebung Groves, the roads are old roads. Nanny's warm arm against mine, Mum and Nanny touching by the Bicky shop next to the butchers, strong deadly women, ready to take on Chermy at peak hour on a Saturday morning. The pride of knowing where every shop is, always notice a new one coming, know the specials, keep the vouchers, push Nanny on the motor scooter, push Nanny along, save for Christmas. The decorations are different each year. Push Nanny up the hill, tell your cousin you're coming over, spend 4 hours looking for an outfit, go to Best and Let's get some undies. Nanny always bought you bonds, said those girls need the best, keep the docket, see if it fits. Each year our bodies change. We get older in changing rooms. We try to fit into jeans and schools that know our black mothers, just trying to fit in. Chermy is always home. New swimmers, birthdays at the pool, the cinemas make us cry sometimes. My mum will kill me true if I don't separate my recycling before I leave the food court. My brother is up playing pinball. He refuses to give me his tokens and lollies. He'll be saving them for weeks. Westfield's sacred to us. Women are the gatherers, make our houses safe. make our families safe. My mum, grandmother, aunties took care of me good. I never had to worry about anything much. Protected us when we were little. We were jarjums. Now we can, with greater ease, make our own mistakes. Auntie buys me Belgium chocolates and Christmas cake each year. We buy stuff, we need stuff. We were starving when we walked up to Mima Street, the hot grass over the fence. Auntie made us sandwich and cuppa, black, always black. Carried over shelves and into tills by the tide. I have had buyer's regret, and I've also experienced lust for t-shirts I will always remember that never went on sale. We get excited the flasher it gets. We are proud of our churmy. There's been so much change and we are weary. Haven't even been inside Feast Street. Have just been carried into the stories, stood outside since I was born. Ask your auntie, she's the youngest. Is your memory going? That's what your father says. Best house on the street, sitting on the back steps, eating ice cream, and sitting on the windowsill, eating an ice block in the school holidays. Long time ago, the tree covers the house now. I don't know where to go now. Auntie T says, couldn't get me off the dunny, always reading Animorphs. One day I'll see small circles in the sky, the aliens will arrive in what's left of the forest, a small bit of park compared to what it was, kids space, a cricket ground, the grass where we took Max to puppy preschool and he got his certificate into dog adulthood. One day the aliens will arrive, I will show my new alien lover Westfield Chermside, tell her that it was sacred, it must not be harmed, that inside are shiny things, delicate pathways like the slight slope up to Coles with the warm popcorn scent, all the exits to Maya. I will show my new alien lover and she will understand my love for Chermy. You haven't lived life on Earth until you've been to Harris Scarf and seen their prices on bras, the brand Serena Williams likes, and met my family are pretty deadly. I want you to meet them, maybe at the Chinese restaurant, or is it closed, closed, and we'll hold hands to the bus interchange and catch the 333. Chermside Shopping Centre is one of our sacred sites, Gammon. Called these days a major suburb, a new CBD, the first Apple store. Have you seen the new food court? We haven't really started buying online. We get excited the flasher it gets. We are proud of our Chermy. There has been so much change and we are weary. 1867, the Gympie Gold Rush. Settler invaders got stuck going north on way to the goldfields, found trouble in the creek, Downfall Creek. The rain don't feel like rain when you're running from the car park to the entrance. Summer storms sometimes cause puddles on the floor. Auntie tells me not to slip outside the bookstore. Reminds me I'm wearing thongs, 2 sizes too big. Water birds, always birds, still follow the water, and large mobs of lorikeets get drunk every night outside Chermy like teenagers. From the park across from Arnie's place, you can see the church, the Prince Charles, and the best sunsets. I jogged here, I swam here, like Nanny and Mum and Auntie. I also lived here, my place in Chermside during uni on Kingsmill Street. Opposite the library, they knocked my block down to build high-rise. Auntie walks past, keeps an eye out for me. Chermy is rising, going up in the world, rising. At Downfall Creek, the white fellas are falling, and we are rising to the airspace, to the sky. I think it's really interesting that echoes come into your work. Like the last line of that poem is we are rising, and I didn't realize at the time, but I can see the echo of Auntie Udru New Knuckles, We Are Going in that poem, which is like really interesting. I'm really glad that you mentioned Udru and Judith Wright, because they are just incredible people and always should be acknowledged when we talk about Australian poetry, Queensland poetry, politics, the movement, but they're also personal influences on my poetry. I have a lot of volumes of their books that are just like the pages are coming out, that I picked up in like secondhand shops. And you know what you said about having like these books should be available very like for every new generation coming up to read, because what these women are saying in these books is so relevant today. And so yeah, they've been two people that have been really influential to me. As I was reading that poem, I was also thinking, I read it a couple of years ago, but I could easily do like a remix version, because you know, these Westfields, they keep changing. So there's like, you know, I think there's an extra level now in Chermy, like from being like the biggest single level shopping centre for a while to now like having the second level, and just like, you know, it's really interesting for me to like write about capitalism as like a First Nations person, and just like how, yeah, just also thinking about what is the place underneath the place. And it really just takes me back to those childhood memories of really kind of thinking that it was cool to wear shoes that were really big, even though they like obviously didn't fit and probably looked a bit weird, but just wanted to have that like illusion that I had like size 11 feet when I did it. I don't know why, but yeah. So I think I'm going to read a couple more poems as well, if that's all right.
Can I just say,
Yeah.
you know, when I think of those wonderful poets, Judith Wright and Udru, something that appeals to me enormously that they shared was a wonderful friendship across their lives.
They had a great friendship
that we read about in their correspondence. And I always loved the way Judith Wright spoke of Udru New Knuckle, particularly the line, Udru will be remembered long after the rest of us have gone. But the friendship, unlikely but so treasured and influential for both of them.
Yes, and of course 2020 is the centenary of the late Udru New Knuckles' birth. So, you know, you refer earlier, Quentin, to the papers of Udru's writing life. They're held, of course, in the Friar Library here at UQ, and also papers of Judith Wright's time as well, along with Herb Wharton and Jackie Huggins and others. There's a real treasure trove. So, Ellen, you give us quite a journey in Throat. You focus there on some, you know, childhood or teenage memories of Chermy and tapping into memories of your mothers and aunts as well. In some ways, the collection is a trajectory too through your young adulthood, which from my perspective I'd still see you in. But there are some really interesting, if you could say, phases of your growing.
It's interesting that when you think like, when am I going to like, when's that cut off when you stop being a young person? Because I'm turning 30 soon, and but it's relational. Like I think I still. It depends on like the company that I'm with. I definitely see. I love how like people of all ages read this book, and then when I get like teenagers, like people like 14, 15, or like people in their early 20s that really like this book. It's really a beautiful conversation. And when they say things like, I inspire them and stuff, I'm like, oh, are you sure? Like, that's really beautiful. Because I'm so inspired by the young generation, as I think every new generation is so inspired by the generation after them, because they inherit these freedoms and they inherit this voice that potentially we didn't have when we were growing up. So I'm hugely in following the footsteps of so many people, but just as prominently hope to leave footsteps for other people to follow, and even people that have not yet to be born.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing on that. The award that you've won, the
What an
UQB
honour.
Dame
Yeah.
Quentin Bryce Award,
Yeah.
is dedicated not only in honour of Quentin and such quality writing, but also reflecting on gender equality.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to share with the audience this evening around your poetry in relation to gender equality?
Yeah, absolutely. So I identify as a genderqueer person that's outside the male-female binary. Really strongly identify as a feminist and an intersexual feminist who has been predominantly shaped by strong Aboriginal women who have raised me and have been in my life and have showed me, been partial to being part of this real maternal, matriarchal culture where the women are like the bosses. So they're the people that I want to make proud. But obviously we live in a patriarchal society that's really, still very patriarchal, very, if you're different, if you're queer, gay, trans, if you're not white, it's a very difficult, and if you're a woman, it's a very difficult place to live. And so this work particularly talks about people in my beautiful rainbow family, so LGBTIQ people, and also people who also Aboriginal women, and talking in particularly about violence towards these groups and just the real kind of injustice that has happened. If I can, think of one poem in particular that's dedicated to Miss Du. And it's really, for me, it's really important to write about, to honour these women and the terrible injustices that they have, and if things don't change, then it's going to be. I was talking to a colleague who's lives in Geraldton yesterday, and she was just talking about how it's the place has a sickness, so these things keep happening, these women keep dying, and it's extremely sad and extremely terrible. And I really, when you think you're sitting in your desk and you're writing poetry and you're trying to write about this, you kind of feel like, am I making a difference? Because you kind of think, there's, maybe I should be working in mental health or working on prison abolishment and all these things that I feel like will make a tangible difference. But I have always seen literature as a place of opportunity, and so I feel like that's where I found my voice. And I'm using, I don't feel like I need to write a book like any other book. I can write my own book, and I can do things like have a treaty with the reader in the middle of the book and do things that are a little bit different.
For sure, absolutely. And thanks so much for that sharing. I think your poem, The Only Black Queer in the World, is a great little poem that traces for your readers your own journey through that, and your discovering the literature of other Indigenous peoples and how that empowered you. Yeah.
I cut Ellen off before with my comment about Ujuru and Judith Wright when you were just going to read the apology.
I was going to read a poem, but you did. We're in conversation. I really like that you picked up on that, because I'm hoping. The worst thing is if I read a poem and then everyone's just completely silent, and then I feel like, well, maybe
Oh, we're receiving it. We're busy receiving it and allowing it to move through us.
I'm glad that there's some conversation in between poems. But yeah, I did want to read this poem called The Last Apology, which was written, I'll talk a little bit more after, but the important detail is that it was written on Sorry Day 3 years ago. The Last Apology. Let this be the last apology that moves from your lips. I don't want your flowers or your cheek kisses. I don't want your words. My hands move to my ears. You want to make up and make out. You don't want to promise you won't do it again. It must never, 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 never happen again, you said 10 years ago. We are truly equal partners with a beautiful future ahead. Let this be the last apology that moves from your lips. I don't want your flowers or your cheek kisses. I don't want your words. My hands move to my ears. You want to make up and make out with the Aboriginal flag. I want you to promise you won't do it again.
Thank you. Thank you for the last apology. So 4 years ago?
I think it was 2017, which was that 10 years after the Prime Minister at the time, Kevin Rudd, delivered that apology to the stolen generations. In 2007, I actually was in my first year of uni at QUT, which is where I met you.
Yes.
You were doing a PhD at the time.
That's right.
Yeah. And I think it was my first week of uni, because it was in February, right? And we're all in the common room of the Ujuru unit, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander unit that's named after Ani Ujuru at QUT Kelvin Grove campus. And sitting in the common room, and the TV was on, and Prime Minister was delivering his speech, and I was in the room with a lot of older people that were personally affected by the stolen, were stolen gen themselves, or were personally affected by the stolen generations, and the emotions were really tangible and really mixed. And I guess, not to speak for any member of the stolen generations, but for some people that apology wasn't enough. For others it was a healing moment to have finally been acknowledged after so many decades of denial and just yeah, awful kind of, but then, thinking about that moment, 10 years on at the anniversary, thinking about how the removal of First Nations children is it's actually higher than it was then. And so, how do we how do we have a language for that when a government can apologise for past wrongs, which is really important, and we need that truth telling, but we do need to look at, kind of how things are now and not repeat the mistakes of the past, because children who, sadly, children who don't grow up with their families, we know are much more likely to have, to suffer in so many different ways.
It's a wonderful thing that a poet can contribute, though.
Yeah.
Many of us take a long time to learn that the most important tool we have for change, for making the world a better place, for the advancement of human rights. Our most important tool is our voice. And you were talking before of your questioning of yourself as you sit at your desk writing poetry and thinking of your friend in Geraldton, is it enough? And it's an incredible strength and power, and as you reflect on your feelings and the frustration many people sense about numbers of children away from their families. That's what we have to remember, and that's why we look to the great women, the elders like Udjuru and Judith Wright and so many others who for a source of inspiration. So we don't give up or feel overwhelmed.
Absolutely.
That we do have our voice, and a voice we always think of now in 2020 is Archie Roach. They've taken the children away.
Absolutely.
Music and the arts are incredible, powerful, strong tools for the protection of human rights.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of truth-telling in this collection.
I know. I feel that's I mean, the title "Throw" kind of speaks to that. I found through writing this book that healing can come from the most smallest and unexpected places.
I think we have got to the stage in our country where we understand that truth-telling is absolutely key to the future, to the promise, the hopes of the Uluru Statement, of many of the themes in your beautiful words, the need for truth-telling to bring about measures like a treaty, a voice to Parliament, that truth-telling is threshold, it's key. And it's happening.
And it's wonderful, Quentin, how you see such value too in the literary takes on, a really important content that you've overseen inquiries into and reports being written about. For example, the really important work that you've done in Queensland around domestic and family violence. So there's, Ellen, you referred to earlier the close of a poem perhaps being an echo of the work of Udjuru's. Your last two lines on the last apology are, "I want you to promise you won't do it again," which to me resonates a little bit of the same plea, request, ask that we hear through all of our discussions about domestic and family violence. Was that intentional?
Yeah, the poem has that juxtaposition where it's you're not sure who the addressee is. It could be It could be an individual, it could be like a partner, an abusive partner, or it could be, an institution. So yeah, I kind of wanted to play with that double play in that poem. Yeah.
It has a real rhythm to it, I think, that poem, which is the power of a lot of protest poetry.
It's wonderful, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. And there's, Ellen, we talk about truth as if we can all hold to the one truth, which we know is difficult.
Yeah.
So I think what your work allows us to do, and allows your readers to do, is find their place in it. So these, you allow for silences and spaces and, quirky juxtapositions in ways that trigger imagination and possibility, which of course is the art of poetry.
Yeah.
And this collection, you've played with form enormously. There are so many different structures to the poems that you've created. Did you have a sense of how you wanted to structure your poems?
Yeah. I read a lot of poetry, and I try and read poetry from like all over the world. But I would say I'm quite new to it, like it's, I've been about 6 years of like really being like someone who like is taking it in as much as possible. And through reading poetry, I've gathered a sense of how each individual writer might be using different forms and different structures to communicate, and different styles. And so now, before, when I used to sit down and write a poem, it would just come out any way it wanted to. And now, when I think about an idea for a poem, I also think about what form is going to be the most effective. And it's almost like those two ideas come at the same time. And then it comes together like that, which is, I find it's really good, and I feel like it's still very natural. I feel like it still kind of comes from within me.
That's wonderful.
Can I ask you about the title?
Yeah, so for, those of you who haven't had a chance to read it yet, there's an epigraph by a Black British poet called Patience Agbibi, and the quote is, "No one's found until they find themselves hurting in the back of the throat." A close friend of mine gave me a huge collection of books by Black British women that were published in the early 90s. She said, here, you can read them and give them back to me whenever, or you don't have to. And I found that quote from Patience's work, and it followed me around when I thought about the back of the throat, and I thought about hurting in the back of the throat. And I was starting to write these poems. It's about 4 years of poems in this book, and I didn't have a umbrella to put them under yet. And then I thought about throat, and I thought about, originally it was called Back of the Throat, but I thought about how it's symbolic of so many different things. It's really, for me, it's about voice and truth-telling, and saying things that I might be scared to say. That's always like a sign that you're like doing something right, if you feel unsure about it. Maybe not that everything that I write gets published, but sometimes you feel ready to say something that you haven't been able to say for a while. So there's topics there, like that are really, trying to, kind of just really dig deep. And another echo that came through was like the black-throated finch, which is a bird that's already being pushed to the edge of extinction, but is like really caught up in the Adani Carmichael mine. Like this is a bird that will become extinct if this, that's what's been estimated. So it's become a real symbol for that. And so there's a lot of environmental themes, as well as talking about community and potentially talking about things that are difficult, like talking about, someone in the, you might have an uncle in the community who's like homophobic, and like how do you deal with that, like just stuff like that I feel is important to talk about.
Oh, well, we're coming very near the end of this evening, and Ellen, you're just such a special person for us, First Nations peoples, and for all of your readers. You observe closely, you think and feel deeply, and you bring all that through this poetry and also your prose in ways that are quite unique. Even though you draw on traditions, you still make it your own. You make these sets of words your own. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to keep taking care of you in that, because you perform such an important role for us.
I love some of the lines that are so gentle, and the beauty of the language. In my home, my country, now several hundred kilometres northeast from here, the sun sits on my shoulders. It's such a Queensland girl line, really.
And it was quite sunny today too.
Oh, it was beautiful today. 27
August. Degrees, Melbourne. Sorry, Melbourne. I hope you're doing okay.
If any of my Melbourne friends and kin are listening, I love you and I feel for you. And I did spend 2 years living in Melbourne, partly while I was reading this book, and I didn't realise how much of a Queenslander I was until I lived in Melbourne, because it's a very different place.
Yes.
And I was homesick, as well as feeling extraordinarily grateful for the community there for being so welcoming. And
they have a wonderful literary community, absolutely. Now we must also mention, we have some questions here very quickly. Now, Sandy O'Sullivan, good evening. I'll read out what you've posed to Ellen, Sandy. In a way, though, I do think Ellen answered this earlier, but I'll let you have a minute on that. Sandy writes, the way you've written about it tracks the changes. This is yours and Chermside's, and the world's towards us, with us, against us, and by us. But I also wonder if writing about Chermside changed your feelings about it now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I feel in a kind of practical way, my book came out in May this year, and it was during the first wave of the pandemic. And I remember getting an email saying, can you record your poem Chermy for like the Overland Journal? They wanted to have a recording online. I was like, sure. And I thought it would be funny to do it in the Chermside shopping centre, but it was, it was closed because it was, COVID time. But I sort of made Mum come with me, and I was like in a trolley, and I was like, Mum, can you film? My mum's like, no, we're not going to do this. But it did make me think about how, I have like immortalized that place in my poetry, and it's a place that will continue to have significant meaning for me beyond this work, because it's just got so many memories, and that's a lot about the book is about those memories, and not just individual memories, but things Mum tells me, or like my auntie tells me, and or my cousins tell me, and how that just keeps carrying. And in some ways I feel like that's poetry, like that's I can't fit that all in a book, but you know, that's like the real poetry.
Beautiful, wonderful, thank you for that. And Rebecca Lemoyne has made a comment and asked a question as well. Congratulations, Ellen, Rebecca says, and thank you, Quentin. Poets have been voices for resistance and hope for thousands of years, so relevant for these times. Ellen, what are you working on at the moment, and how would you describe its tone?
How would I describe its
Tone.
okay. I am working on trying to document this time that we're living in through poems. We've got this podcast that we were really fortunate to get copyright agency funding with UQP, where we ask a poet to be in conversation with us, to have a poem that's like really relevant to what's happening now, and have the challenge of writing in a very short amount of time. So I would say the tone of the work is very, it's very like, it's different to the other work that I'm doing, because it's very like immediate and very kind of raw, and I'm not really like, I'm expanding my voice more than I have,
That sounds very exciting, very exciting, and congratulations on receiving the Copyright Agency funding, UQP and yourself. How many poets will you be speaking with?
We'll be 6 poets.
Okay.
We've had our first episode for July with the poet Eunice Andrada, who's a Filipina poet based in Sydney, and we both wrote poems about kind of environmental poems about, like, you know, there's a lot of talk about COVID potentially having positive, the pandemic having positive effects on the environment, with production shutting down and less pollution and everything, but you know, we know that that's not the whole truth, so we talked about that. And we also have the lovely Charmaine Paper Talk Cream coming up in a future episode, as well as Ali Kobi-Eckermann.
Oh, too exciting. So is that all available on the UQP website?
It is, yeah.
Fantastic. So I encourage everyone to go to that. Unfortunately, I have to call the conversation to a close. The last hour has been really rich, and despite the high ceilings here, actually quite warm. And it's been wonderful to share some in real life time with you both on the panel. So thanks so much, Quentin Bryce, for coming along tonight. It's fantastic. And Ellen van Neerven, what a wonderful opportunity to spend some time so close to you and your mother here this evening. And to UQP, thank you so much for organising the evening, and to the University of Queensland, I believe, for being the funder of the Quentin Bryce Award. So I'm concluding the Q&A session, the panel session, with great regret, but we will all need to go home. I'd invite, as I'm instructed here, guests this evening who have not yet got a copy of Throat to rush online and purchase a copy of Throat.
Or a coffee.
And a coffee maybe tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Drink the coffee, read the
Read the
poetry.
poetry.
I'm encouraging you to buy it from Riverbend Books.
Yes.
I am, of course, open to other bookshops, but this evening I will encourage you to buy that from Riverbend Books. And
Well,
thank
who
you.
are such wonderful supporters.
They are
Yes.
wonderful
and leaders
supporters.
of the Indigenous
yeah.
Literacy Foundation.
Foundation, yeah. And a beautiful bookshop that's quite close to my local soccer club. I play for the Southside Eagles. So,
Southside Eagles.
and in Bulimba, yeah.
Are you playing at the moment?
We are.
See,
I feel very grateful because my friends in Melbourne and Sydney are not playing.
Yeah.
But it's amazing being able to play. Yeah.
That's great. Fantastic. See, we could
It's just
talk
the right
on.
size to tuck into your handbag, this book, too. I say to my
it's a perfect
grandchildren, the book
size.
is your best friend and you can take it everywhere with you.
So good. Mum used to say that as well. Like, you were saying how all the grandkids are reading, which is really cool.
I think everybody's doing more reading.
Everyone needs to read, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's the only thing
And
that gets me
especially
through.
poetry. Poetry has become incredibly popular again. It's wonderful to see.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, well, we will be wrapping up the evening. Thank you so much for being available for tonight's conversation. It's been really enjoyable.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.